So our thinking is the first thing to get control over. If we're thinking positively, thinking beautifully, thinking imaginatively, thinking creatively, thinking practically, of course, we are starting the process of making that happen. There's no separation between action and thinking in this respect. Thinking is already an action.
Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, it's John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in to another Inspire conversation. I've been looking forward to this one, and believe it or not, technology almost tried to prevent it, which is all the more reason to make it happen. Today, we're honored to welcome Sir Julian Rose, a true pioneer in organic farming, rural resilience, and sovereignty, from inheriting his family's estate in crisis to becoming one of the UK's earliest organic farmers. Julian has spent decades fighting for food freedom, ecological preservation, and strong rural communities. He's led high-profile campaigns to protect unpasteurized milk, founded movement to defend small farmers, and developed the proximity principle, a formula for local self-sufficiency in food, fiber, and fuel. His work extends far beyond his own land, from shaping national agricultural policy to protecting the Polish countryside from corporate and globalist threats. Julian Rose is the author of In Defense of Life, essays on a radical reworking of green wisdom, creative solutions to a world in crisis, and overcoming the robotic mind, why humanity must come through. Julian's passions aligns deeply with what matters most to us and you, Inspired Tribe: self-reliance, the defense of natural living, and the courage to challenge the system. So Julian Rose, it's a great honor to have you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to hear such an accurate description of my life. Thank you very much for that.
Well, I pride myself on forensic research, and I like to know before I speak with someone. I think it's a sign of respect to know what they've done.
Yes.
And like I said to you off camera, sir, I've been reading your articles reposted on other websites, and notably David Icke's website, for quite some time. And every time I was pulled in literally into your writing, until I finally wanted to learn more, went to your website and realized just the body of work, that you've been doing for such a long time. And my first question is, it's 2025 and the world is in an interesting place, to say the least. What keeps you going? What keeps you motivated to show up and share with the world?
Well, really, that's a very significant question. And that's really the fundamentals of what makes us tick as creative beings. I don't use the word life lightly. There's an interesting epitaph on a gravestone in an English churchyard, which says, John Smith, here lies John Smith. The fact that he died does not necessarily mean he lived. Now, this is really quite to the point, isn't it? Because what we describe as life is a jumble of largely superficial things, of which occasionally enter some deeper, more meaningful realities. But for the way the world is structured at the present time, life for most people really means something which is closer to a medium, which is closer to death, in my view, really, because we're not using our potentials. We're not using our creativity. We're sparks of the divine, and we're not using that spark. We're saying, oh, no, that's not true. We're trying to argue with God and say, no, that's you. You're that one. We're not. We're just the little people trying to make contact with you. And the point is, once one has a sense of passion about something one really believes in, it starts informing everything else. So I think it started for me quite early on in my life, really. I started developing a passion for the arts, particularly for acting. And I got involved in an experimental theatre company called the Players Theatre of New England, based near Boston. And now, of course, I'm an Englishman, and you might say, well, what on earth were you doing going to Boston? It's a long story, and I don't need to go into it. But I did land up in Boston as part of this experimental theatre company. And why I got so passionate about it was because the roles that we were playing, there were about 6, 7 actors. We didn't use any costumes, no set materials, no props on the stage, but we had 5 or 6 people depicting an adaptation of the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, which a lot of people will know, a very famous piece of American writing. And we had about 45 minutes to tell the whole story. And we, in the course of performing, we performed the roles of animals, trees, birds, wind, and the actual characters who feature, like Ichabod Crane, etc., and others in that great story, moving through that scene as well. So what happened was I learned how to recognize the inside feeling of what it must be like to be a tree. And then what it must be like to be a wind. Let's say a storm, particularly, because it's dramatic and it's powerful. And then how to evolve out of a storm into a human being in a particular frame of mind, and then from that into something else. And this linked up for me something very exciting. It linked up different elements which are normally seen as separate, and I recognized they're not. So this was a personal experience I had in my early 20s, really. I worked with this theatre company for quite a long time. It actually eventually became a teaching outfit based in Belgium, in Antwerp and in Brussels. And we taught young people how to learn academic music and drama all within the same setting, if you like, and saw them flourish as human beings, because we were, so to speak, giving them a holistic actual experience as opposed to an intellectual learning experience. Because the interesting, I'll just tune in on with the word education, because education comes from educare in Latin, which means to lead out from, you know. Whereas what's happening is that it's to push into, you know. So we were working from the opposite premise. We were working to lead out from. There's a very talented person here. The issue is to let that talent come out and express itself and lead us where it will. Don't have a preconceived view of where it's going to go, you know. Let it lead you where it will, and then we're in new territory. Then we're in seriously creative territory. I worked with this theatre company for a long time, and then I'm coming from a background, an aristocratic family. My title is baronet, and it's an inherited title. There's nobody in government or in the royal family who would ever put a sword on my shoulder and give me a sir. Believe me, because I'm almost against everything they say.
I figured as much.
So essentially, this comes back from my great-grandfather's time. I inherited this title on the death of my elder brother in a motor racing accident when I was 16, and my father when he died of a stroke when I was only 19 years old. And I inherited a country estate. And believe me, this was the last thing I wanted to do. It scared me. You know, I wanted to be an artist of some sort. I certainly didn't want to be the manager of a country estate. But nevertheless, what happened when I was working with the theatre company in Antwerp was a lecturer came from an organization in England to tell a story about ecological farming. And I went to it. It was very fortunate that I even saw the poster. An English lecturer came to Antwerp to talk about ecological farming, and somehow or other I was tuned in to go to this. And immediately I got into the lecture hall and started to hear what this gentleman, a biologist, was saying. I suddenly understood what I was supposed to do with my farm, because I didn't know up until then. I had an intuitive sense of I wanted to work with nature rather than against it if it was possible, but everyone said it's not possible. You know, you have to go down the agrochemical route. That's the only way. And you were not going to turn the clock back and go back to all those weeds and all the rest of it. No, no. So when I went to this lecture, it opened my eyes to the fact that this is a dynamic phenomenal dynamic situation. You're working with nature, working with the soil, with all the microbes, nutrients, vitality, vitamins. And this links straight into the quality of the food, which is coming out of that soil. And the quality of the food links into your health, not only your physical health, your mental health, after all, and so on. And the cycle comes always back again to soil. It goes in a cycle: soil, plant, animal, man, back to soil again. So when I saw and heard this, I immediately thought, this is no different from my theatre work. In my theatre work, we were working on the connection between voice, movement, text, and music. And I saw that as a quantum, if you like. And then I suddenly have soil, plant, animal, man as another quantum. So I said to myself, this is the law of physics. This is the law, abiding law underneath everything, that everything's connected, and that the spirit of and the creativity you put into something will reflect right through the chain into everything else. So to answer your question, it took a long time. Essentially, I was lucky enough, fortunate enough, to come across one or two people who inspired me to go down this route. And actually, there were two particular writers. One was Eric Fromm. Do you ever read his books, Escape from Freedom?
No, I haven't. No, I've heard of him, but I haven't read the book. No.
Yes, he was a very famous psychoanalyst. And then someone called Fritz Schumacher, who wrote a book called Small is Beautiful, all about how to manage the planet. And when I put those two together, they also supported my view, my feeling at least, that what I was about to try and do in life is going to be going against the grain of the status quo, really 100%. But I had the passion to actually go for it.
You know, when I read your articles and the ones that you've been writing lately, I maybe even more passion than ever in some of it, you know, even more life force in it than ever. What is interesting when you talked about your early experiences in theater and the expression of the elemental forces, and it's, you know, it reminded me of very familiar with systemic therapy and family constellation therapy work, which I don't know if you're familiar with Bert Hellinger, who was the founder of this, but basically, I think in a similar way, he visited with indigenous tribes and stepped into their system, and the system, the field, informed him about what was going on as he was feeling himself a part of it. And so when I read your articles, it feels like you are putting yourself in that system, which informs you about its dynamics. That's why it makes it such a comprehensive, a deep read for me, because it's a perspective from within, rather than a lot of people are simply observing it and maybe projecting their hopes and dreams on what is unfolding. Which brings us to the present day, where on the one hand, the disconnection from man and nature is bigger than it's probably ever been. On the other hand, there is this awakening among millions of people that are seeking that connection again, in any way they can. And this fork in the road, how do you experience it yourself? You know, having gone through all this life experience, and where do you see the dynamics going? Will there be a unified path, or are we walking two separate paths?
No, that's a very good question, because we would like to believe, I believe we'd like to believe, that we're going towards a unified path. But everything that I see around me, even amongst people who are pretty switched on, is very personal at the moment. Actually, it is rather narcissistic, I would even say. It's a very me world, and most people are looking out for their own goods. Now, there's nothing surprising about that. In a certain sense, you could say that the survival instinct is always going to come back to the individual to start with. So if people start getting rattled, frightened, nervous, apprehensive, worried, uncertain, etc., they're going to start with themselves. What am I going to do with my family and myself, my money, my banking, and then they feel a little bit shy about opening up about that, because they want to still appear to be confident in the eyes of other people, They want to appear to be normal, so people don't think there's something strange going on. So they still want to stay adapted to the current status quo while worrying about the direction the entire thing is going in. This tends to produce a feeling of it's me against whatever odds are against us. But once that settles and one starts forming at least a sense of view about a route that one could take under these circumstances, it immediately brings in other people. Because any route that you're going to take is always going to involve other people. So you then start thinking, oh God, who could we work together with? Now, let's take the example of going back to the land, One of the things that's fundamental in a digital age, an IT digital age, with a sort of Wi-Fi based electromagnetic soup constantly on the buzz, is that we're being dragged away from a grounded state into a virtual reality world. And that's why people are behaving weirdly, mostly. Where our thinking process is being dominated by very, very fast transactions and communications on smartphones, iPods, whatever you have, laptops. And our whole energy field is being geared through the mental field. It's through the cranium, really, and the neocortex. So to correct that, if we're going to survive and beat the system, we've got to earth ourselves, I believe. I've had plenty of experience in earthing myself because I'm essentially a farmer for the last 35, 40 years of my life, and I'm still doing it. Here in Poland on a completely different scale. We have 1.5 hectares of land. In England, I have about 450 hectares of land, forestry and farming. And doing 1.5 hectares of land and living in a tiny farmhouse with my Polish wife, who was brought up as a peasant farmer, quite literally, has brought me right back to fundamentals, absolute fundamentals, Now, once one's grounded again in nature and appreciating the outdoors and walking in trees and with animals and with slowing oneself down, one starts immediately thinking about a community. And one wants, well, why can't we live this way? Why can't a group of people who are on roughly the same wavelengths come together? You do this. So then what comes up is really rather interesting, actually. You think, well, it can be done. It can be done. I've had some experience in this field already in the past. And what you find initially is nobody knows how to grow food. Now, the people who have advanced in their thinking and are more switched on and can talk about almost anything from quantum physics to, IT specialities and all the rest of it, but they haven't got a clue how to grow food.
It's true. It's very true.
Somehow you can't imagine surviving in the future really very long if the system gets taken down. And then it's not very difficult to take the system down. It can either be hacked out of your potential to use it, or it can be upset by environmental conditions, or it can be deliberately, that someone can pull the lever on you and that's the end of all your communications on your laptop and everything's gone. And then what do? Your whole medium of communications vanished. So the chance of that happening is quite high, I think, in one form or another. Or you will be slowly persuaded that you've got to adopt ever more high-tech, modern examples of the way things are going in order to be able to keep in communication at all. And by having to go further and further and further down that route, you eventually become a slave to it because you have no other option other than to agree to do it, which means you're in the hands of some corporation, and that's it. That's the end of the story. So to break through, you have to start thinking about off-grid communities of people working together to grow food, relearning the art of growing food, making sure you have access to water. Pure water is very, very important, as important as soil, for instance. That it's like a village used to be in England 70 or 80 years ago. A village community in Poland only 20 years ago was like this, So it's in the recent past that people lived this way, by necessity, actually, not by choice. But the necessity made them work together, made them share with each other, made them barter with each other, made them look after each other's health, made them support each other mentally, physically, etc. And people liked that way of life. That's why you hear people talking about creating eco-villages and what have you now, because something in our gut, something in our DNA, if you like, reminds us of the fact that this is the way we've lived thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And what we're being asked to do in the last 50 years is completely outside that realm. And we're not adapted for it. And if we do adapt for it, we're no longer human. We become transhuman. So the choice is very stark, I think.
I couldn't agree more. I would say to a certain degree, and for a certain section of the population, some irreversible choices have already been made, or maybe, maybe irreversible. We will see that in the future. But because I have a Slavic background, and I know that the Slavic nations, like you say, especially in rural areas, have never fully lost that connection to the land. And through movements in the last decades, regained that. Notably, for example, the Kin's Domain movement out of Russia. I don't know if you're familiar with the Ringing Cedars books.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yes,
Wonderful, yes.
which quite frankly is a vision that has inspired myself and my wife a long time ago, and this
super.
That is what is driving pretty much everything we do. But
Brilliant.
we also see, and I believe we're in the final years of this, this decision point. We're not decades away. We're a few short years away. This looming monster on the horizon called technocracy, which is putting its claw into everything. And I wonder, in my experience with people, working with people, and myself, the first step that needs to be overcome is our inherent savior complex. We're always waiting for someone or something, for an external solution to fix our greatest problems. And right now, to the world, especially here in the United States, but also to the world, there is a solution that was presented in form of a new president and his team, and that is overpowering, overarching, and for a lot of people, it seems to be the answer to their questions. This can never be true. It's an eternal truth. It can never be true. But is it something you observe too, that once people overcome this savior complex, that it's much easier for them to step into personal sovereignty and responsibility and take action?
Well said. Well said. Absolutely right. Yes, this is a very central issue, the savior complex. This goes back a very long way. I mean, what you've touched on is really one of the great problems is really the teachings of the last 2,000 years surrounding religion, especially Christian, I'm talking about, because that's how I was taught. You probably were too, in which the idea is that we are born sinners, and therefore only a savior can redress that for us if we behave very well and ask a lot and do good things. And then you might be lucky enough to land up in a place called heaven, or if you don't, you might land up in a place called hell. A lot of people don't talk about that anymore very much, but still it's in the back of their minds. They haven't got onto the idea that it's a cyclic issue and that you might come back to earth again and have another go at it. That hasn't even arrived yet into Christianity. So you start off with the burden upon your shoulders that you're a sinner. And that basically, that means you can only improve, you can only overcome this fact by following the teachings and the dogma, I have to say, of institutions that claim to be teaching the word of God. But as many of us have found out in the course of our lives, God is within. He's not a figure out on the other side of the universe who's looking down on us and maybe offering us some savior remedy, or maybe not, as the case may be, depending on how much you pray. He's within. He's in every cell in our body. And every one of those cells is an intelligent human being in its own right. He's a multifarious quantum figure. And the breakthrough in the physics at least, and in science is definitely quantum. Because the great thing which Niels Bohr and his colleagues realized when they were trying to discover the nature of the tiniest particle, the subatomic particle, was it changed according to you looking at it. And this was absolutely mind-blowing because, previously you'd thought, I'm here and it's there, and it's an objective and I'm the subjective and it's separate. What happened in that extraordinary moment was they realized that we're all in the same state. And when I look at something, it's affected by my looking at it. It's affected by my emotions, my state of mind, and vice versa. It goes back the other way as well. This is the feeling, and this is the only feeling that can overcome the savior concept, that you are at the center of the universe. Your action is the action which, well, let's put it this way. Your thought process is what produces the outcome, just as I believe the divine's thoughts created the universe. So our thinking is the first thing to get control over. If we're thinking positively, thinking beautifully, thinking imaginatively, thinking creatively, thinking practically, of course, we are starting the process of making that happen. There's no separation between action and thinking in this respect. Thinking is already an action. If we're thinking it's outside of us and we have to affect it, but we're going to remain largely the same, we're in a position which is sterile. And anything which isn't moving forward is actually moving backwards. So we're not making progress, we're going backwards. And while caught in this modern world of excessive discrimination, communication systems based on superficiality and drama, we are being encouraged in every possible respect not to look into ourselves. That's the great danger of the status quo, that we might discover gods within us and that we have the power to make the change. So the savior complex, you touched on absolutely vital core issue to overcome for each one of us individually. Many of us grew up in families where this was a sort of unwritten principle, even if it wasn't spoken about.
In my own life, it was a realization that I was waiting. I was in a state of waiting for someone to do something that I believed was necessary for me to progress in whatever I wanted to do, until I realized that someone might never do it, and maybe they don't even know they're expected to do it, let alone a figure that we cannot see or don't even know. I'm absolutely certain of Christ consciousness, but a return of a physical figure that will somehow fix everything for us never seemed appealing to me. So when that moment came, it was actually a dark moment. It was a dark night of the soul to realize no one's coming. The next moment, however, was very, very, very beautiful, because it also meant I didn't need to wait any longer. I could actually start now. And once I started, taking one step after the other, my reality, just like you said, began to reflect that, of course. We're seeing in our audience, we have a wonderful audience, and our audience has some life experience, and there seems to be this reawakening. It seems to be an easier process for people with life experience. What would you say to a younger generation that is so programmed into this matrix, so programmed through their devices, and those devices give them constant solutions and they promise them that everything will be solved for them? What would be your advice for a younger generation?
Oh my God, I tell you, I wish I had the answer.
Well, we can give our best, at least, right? We can give our best, because that's the generation I would like to talk to actually more, if they would listen.
Okay, well, I would suggest that the first thing I would really suggest, I mean, I know many of these people, don't worry, and we run an eco center here, as well as campaigning I'm the president of something called the International Coalition to Protect the Polish Countryside. I think you mentioned it. But we are also running an eco center, and we have young people come to try and understand and learn a little bit about how to grow food, how to develop gardens with herbal medicines for herbs, herbal medicines, alternative energy sources, etc. We're a demonstration, well, a small scale demonstration center for being off grid. We're not entirely off grid, but although one of our buildings is. The first thing I noticed with these with people under the description you're giving is you tell them leave your mobile phone outside. Oh God, that's a shock. No, I mean, someone might ring, mother might ring, my brother might ring, my boyfriend might ring, and there might be no, sorry, leave your mobile phone outside. Okay. Okay, we've won that one. So you get them inside into the barn where we have our seminars, and then you start by saying to them, look, this place that you've come to explore and to understand how you can grow food and have alternative energy sources and work the land and be in nature, etc., doesn't exist out of some wishful thinking. It's hard work. And that means you have to use your muscles, your body. You have to learn how to move yourself again. And you have to get outside even when it's raining and you don't feel like it. And you have to work with animals, and you have to, and then people start saying, I thought that was all something that we didn't need to do anymore. You quite often get this reaction, not necessarily literally those words, but you can see people thinking this. Oh no, we're beyond all that. That's all stuff of the past. Now we're in the digital age. You don't have to do any of that. You just hit a few buttons and everything's delivered to you, or you do blah, blah, blah. And then you have to say to people, look, what do you feel as a human being? What do you feel after a long day in an office, work you don't like, and having had a mobile phone next to your ear? What do you actually feel? And the odd thing is, what people say is they have to think very hard whether they feel anything. So the first thing to remind people is get back to a point in your own self where you feel, F-E-E-L. That's the point, because you're on an extremely dangerous route if you're losing your feelings, not only your ability to think properly and straight, but you're losing your feelings. That means you are a tool in the hands of other people, and you won't know it because your feelings won't give you the information. I'm in a dangerous situation. I'm about to be used. I'm being conned. I'm not feeling happy. And unless one is in touch, in touch with those very basic instincts and feelings, one has no way forward in life. So that's basically the very, very bottom line for what I would say to young people today.
Well, you know what? I hope this message will find them. Something has to, but I will say this, that in my own experience, once you can convince them to sort of get away from this digital realm for a few hours or even a few days, there's this natural feeling and instinct that starts kicking in. There's an interest, and an observation. Thankfully, our own children were brought up differently, but I was on a survival trip with my son, and he was 20 at the time, 21 last year, and it was an incredible joy. I mean, it was hard. Don't get me wrong. It was hot. It was hot. There was very little water. We didn't bring any food. It was literal survival. But the joy of being able to find your way in such an environment again and start feeling yourself as a part of it just changed
Yes,
something in him.
yes, yes.
What would be your advice? Many of our viewers contemplate or would like to change their lifestyle, go maybe fully off the grid, or at least begin the journey to growing their own food and moving into an environment that is more natural. And for many, it seems like an impossible thing to do, even thinking about it.
Mm.
What would be sort of a step-by-step
Yeah.
way to do it?
Yeah, no, this is a good question. Basically, what I usually advise people is start initially by cutting out your habit of buying everything in the supermarket. You know, the ordinary family farmers in America and England and all over Europe are under enormous threat to survive. And these are farmers who still use broad ecological methods. They rotate their crops, they use farm manure and they put it back on the land, and they grow food of some reasonable quality. They care for their animals, etc. This level of farming is now on the ropes. You know, the WEF, Klaus Schwab and his team, they want to strip the agriculture right out of the picture and make everyone live on synthetic food. I think you realize this. That is the agenda to 2030 agenda, sustainable development agenda, actually, to achieve that within the next 5 years, basically. And what they're proceeding very fast down that route. So you say to people, look, do you want to live on insects? Do you want to live on laboratory meat, which is made, you know, in a pet coming out of a petri dish? Do you want to have milk, which is a chemical substitute of real milk, etc., and so on and so forth? Because if you are remotely interested in your health and in the health of the planet and in the health of the biosphere, this is not a route you would choose. You would have to choose a route which is based on traditional farming methods, and that they evolved into what's now called organic farming. You know, organic farming is the more extreme end of keeping right out of the chemical bag and the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and only using entirely natural methods. But there's a whole raft of farmers who are in an in-between state. Mm-hmm. But they're mostly small and medium sized. They're not the vast factory farms that supply the supermarkets. There's a small and medium sized farms that supply farmers markets, marketplaces in towns, box schemes, and various other more alternative approaches, and small scale shops that specialize in local, fresh food, which is what food's supposed to be. Something which has actually got some life in it, you know, not the devitaminized crap you get on the plastic shelves of supermarkets. It's 10 days old and has traveled 8,000 miles before you even, you know, get to look at it. That's the anathema that's destroying us. So basically, I say to people, find your local farmer who fits that description and support that farmer, because his days are numbered if you don't. He can't sell into the world marketplace. They won't take his food. They only take food produced on vast monocultural prairie farms that need, and the supermarkets that want tons and tons and tons of one product that looks exactly the same. You know, it doesn't alter the view. It doesn't, no wobbly tomatoes or bent broccoli. You know, only absolutely perfect looking food. Another weird phenomena, but nevertheless, that's the way it is. So go to try and find a local farmer, try and find a scheme or a farmer's market, which is very good. They exist in America and in England, of course. And any way you have linking up into the chain while you're supporting real farmers, that's actually the starting point, because you've got to get used to the idea of what real food is by comparison to what you're eating at the moment. And you've got to have a taste for it. And then if you like it and you feel good after eating it, you say, I'd like more of that. Okay, you want more of that? You go back and you say to that farmer, I really like this. I'll do a deal with you. You grow me so many tons of cabbages and potatoes and I'll pay you in advance for them, and do a contract with the farmer. That's an idea which exists in some parts of the eastern sector of our planet, but not much in the West. Or start growing your own. You'll need some advice. You go to the farmer and say to him, how do I grow potatoes? And you may get a strange look from that farmer, raised eyebrow, but never mind. If you ask enough times, he'll say, okay, come with me. I'm doing some potatoes next week and come and have a look. And then you might even say to that farmer, do you have half an acre, a quarter of an acre of land where I could grow some food of my own? And the farmer would probably say yes, because you have to pay him a small rent maybe, but he needs the money. And also he respects the fact, most farmers respect the fact that young people are interested in farming because it's a rare phenomenon. So they're interested in young people who are interested in learning from them. They'll be supportive towards people in that position. So bit by bit by bit, step by step, you can work your way into becoming knowledgeable enough and practical enough to start growing your own food. But in the meantime, start off on a very basic level by locating sources of real food and try and get fresh, flavorful, and seasonal. And absolutely give up the supermarkets because they are destroying the farming communities all over the world. There'll be nothing left but robotic farms very, very soon if we go down that route.
Which will not give us food. It will give us slow death. That's when it gives us. These are such simple things, and it seems to be so logical, yet these simple things have been forgotten because they're all based on community, talking to each other, meeting people in your vicinity, learning what they're doing. I'm always amazed. We live here in Middle Tennessee, and there's a lot of big landowners, big landowners in terms of they have a house and acreage. And that acreage is manicured lawn that receives its regular sprayings with pesticides, and that is the pride. There's no life on that lawn. And it would be so easy to install a food forest, you could literally hire people to do it for you and just benefit from whatever happens. And I think we still are in this information campaign. However, there's a great sense of urgency, and I know you feel it too, although it's been here for a long time, but it's getting more urgent.
Yes.
How do we, for people who say, this future of technology promises us eternal life, it promises us everything. And what you're talking about, speaking to me or someone like you, is basically returning to a more primitive or a more Stone Age, sort of lifestyle. I don't see it at all that way. What is your
No.
response to that?
No, no, it's not at all that way. And in fact, the word survival isn't the right word at all. I mean, that is an instinct which is absolutely vital for anybody. And some, sadly, millions of people on this planet have been subjected to a situation where they're forced only to be able to use that instinct. But this is utterly disgraceful, and it's to do with the completely wrong distribution of wealth. And you only have to look at Trump and Musk and all these people, and then look at the fact that in almost every country in the world, there's millions of people starving, barely enough food. And that the whole system is totally, totally wrong. You just have to completely rethink it from the bottom up. Now, if you're going to rethink it from the bottom up, that means the redistribution of wealth comes very, very close to one of the first things one's got to think about. So, under those circumstances, we should share our knowledge, our resources, and our enthusiasm, and our willingness to help each other to create a much better and more pleasurable life than we've got at the moment. It's not going backwards, it's going forwards. We actually have the means and the capacity and the skills and the materials are even available to us largely still to be able to build, to create, to make things. But we need different types of expertise as part of the mix. And then the burden doesn't land on one person's shoulders. Like if I had inherited my country estate and had nobody else to support me, I would have found it overwhelming because too much responsibility on one person's shoulders. But if there was a group of people who all said, what a fantastic resource, I can offer this, I can offer that, I can offer that, all of a sudden the whole thing comes to life and a smile opens in your heart instead of that heavy, weighty feeling, oh my God, am I going to cope? The whole thing changes. And you suddenly realize, okay, look, this is the way it's meant to be. Everything has gone very far off this because of greed and personal ambition and the idea that money is what makes you and that's about it. And unless you've got a decent education, there's no chance you've got a job in a proper corporation and earn millions at the end of the year. If you can strip all that out and know that this is the cause of all the dilemmas and problems of the world at the moment and get back to the most basic level again, it becomes something of a forward step. Now, this is interesting because people always say you can't turn the clock back. Go back to the Stone Age, as you said.
That is what I'm hearing always. And I said, that's not at all what we're talking about.
Yes, going back to the Stone Age. Well, no, you don't need to go back to the Stone Age, but you might need to go back 50 odd years and re-examine how people were living quite well on small areas of land. And for instance, on 2 or 3 acres of land, you can grow enough food for a family. On 5 acres of land, you could probably employ one person. On 10 acres of land, you could include some artisan products or some other type of small scale industry. And so it expands, you can envision another world developing with the basic template of a piece of land which is in reasonably fertile condition.
There's this idea that all of the problems that we're currently facing can only be solved in a centralized way, big government, taking more control in order to fix this. And in my perception, local has always been the solution, but also realizing that 90% or more of the entire apparatus is obsolete when we go back to local resilience and local solutions. Now, you live in a local community. You've lived like that, I think, for quite some time. How much of this centralized decision process and these big structures do we actually need? And how does it work in a community of a few hundred people if they actually share a same or similar level of consciousness?
Well, it's very tricky, this one, because, for instance, you're talking to me at the moment in Poland, and this is not my cultural background, but it's a fascinating country in every respect. I'm living in a village of 2,000 people here in the countryside, essentially about 50 kilometers from Krakow. There are surrounding where I live about one small farm, and 2 or 3 people growing potatoes. 1 or 2 people grew up with hens. Hens are pretty popular. You see a lot of them running around everywhere. And in the majority of the village down below us, there's nothing going on to do with farming at all. They're completely devoted to the modern lifestyle. They commute in and out of Krakow. They have jobs in various places, and they don't even attempt. They don't build barn anymore. They make garages, right? So the car has taken over from the barn. And that's a very powerful symbol. This is considered progress. Now, the difficulty is, because it's considered progress, it looks like what you said earlier on. It looks like we're going back to the Stone Age, because the progress is having a car, having an iPod, having all the things required to make your life more convenient, and that's a critically important word today, and really largely ignoring the political situation and except swearing a lot about politicians because they're making a mess of everything. But it doesn't translate into people taking action. No. So I've undertaken 5 years ago to write a newsletter for this village, which comes out 4 times a year, a seasonal newsletter. Well, to start with, I simply described myself as an outsider observing life in a small Polish village and why I liked it. And I started off by saying, actually, I tell you why I like this village. There are 7 small shops and no supermarkets. And when this was distributed, this newsletter, I went down to the main local shop in the village. And what he had done is he took an advertisement down from the front area when immediately you walk into the shop, and he put my message up on the wall. And I thought, right, I really hit home. This is actually what some people think. Because they're not going to say so necessarily, but this is what they think. So this newsletter has evolved now into a sort of educational tool for making people aware of what's going on around them, because they haven't got a clue. It's that bad. I don't want to mince my words here, because the question you're asking is sort of, you can't get to the answer of it without recognizing how far from being able to be in that state people are. and how devoted they are to their convenience lifestyle and to better street lighting, LED lights. Oh, wonderful. Yes, and to everything being so modern. And oh, now Poland's finally catching up with the rest of the world. What a wonderful thing that is. And one saying, sorry, everything that was good in this country was wiped out about 30 years ago. And you're on a trail which is leading to disaster. You can't say it. You have to gradually try and get people to become aware of the larger picture, and that what they think is the salvation is actually the sort of death knell. And bit by bit by bit, because they're very deep over here. They're deep thinking people. They're slower thinking. They're not in a big rush. So you can almost see people nodding their heads slowly and thinking, he could be right. And that's about the level. That's about the level. In England, it's different picture, different culture, different state of affairs. It's more intellectual. It's nearly all mind operation. It's difficult to get people to do any hard work in England anymore. Young people who are devoted to the idea, fine, like, the Anastasia people in Russia, are the equivalent, plenty of young people like that in England. I've now got many of them working in different small scale units, earning a living, and the whole atmosphere there is transformed since I was a child. It's a community. It is a living, working community, and it's making just enough income to be able to support people. And so I do, as you rightly said, have the experience of seeing this evolve. But I tell you, it took 60 years to get to this point, which is only just the foundation for beginning a process of real enlightenment and real awareness and real joined up thinking. It's only the beginning point.
That's incredible, because according to my observations and calculations and that of many others, we don't have 60 years. We might not have 6 years for the next step. It might have to happen quicker. So
exactly.
We all we can do is encourage people to do what their baby steps in their world, because that's all you can do, but actually do them. And thankfully, we have a very active audience, which is wonderful. So they are doing them. Where can people learn more about your work? Maybe they are in Poland and maybe they wish to, even come in person or visit what you're doing. How can they connect with you?
Well, I'm always happy to let people contact me. If they go onto my website, www.julianrose.info, they will see, I think it's maybe under the section called reviews or whatever, they'll see access to my email address, and they can write to me, and I answer everybody who writes to me. And of course, I have my books like Overcoming the Robotic Mind. Some people might be interested in it. It's written in 1919, but it's very much of the moment. Overcome the Robotic Mind, Why Humanity Must Come Through. This is what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about overcoming the robotic mind, why humanity must come through. That's the subject of this era. So whatever we can put into the pool will be gratefully received. And I love hearing from other people about what they're doing and how they are or not succeeding. And I want to say one last thing about that, which is this, that it's always been a small group of people who have brought big change to the planet. It's never been the majority. And that's the funny thing about democracy. Democracy is a sort of flawed system because it's the great majority haven't got the first idea really what wisdom and truth and a wise committee of the great would do if it was put in charge of the world. But a small group of people might. So it's always a smaller group of people who bring the big change. So don't worry about the vast majority. They will go the way they go. They will go through the process they have to go through in order to evolve. It may take many lifetimes or whatever. But there is a small group of people who are ready here and now to take this planet further into a positive direction. And we're talking to each other, like you and I are talking to each other at this very second. We're talking to each other, even if we don't see each other. We're getting onto the same emotional wavelengths. psychological wavelength, creative wavelength, that is contributing hugely to a future which we can't see yet. It may be at the cosmic level. Everything we do is received and built upon on unseen levels. We see 0.05% of the life that exists in the universe because that's the nature of our starved brains. We have no idea what's really going on. So every positive actions that this smaller group of people doing is causing ripples, positive ripples to form where there was previously slack and deleted energy. And that is the key issue. It doesn't matter. The end result's not in our hands, really, but the process of creating the new energy is in our hands. So the more we link up, the more we push forward, the more we fight for wisdom, truth, love, compassion, and against the disastrous status quo, the more power we get. The more power we get. And eventually we can face the most draconian and horrific thing of all and win. We will beat it. The light will shine through. And that's the nature of our universe. We know it will. No doubt.
What a beautiful message. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for the inspiration, for a lifetime of work that you share with us that others can learn from, and from the spirit. It's wonderful. Thank you for your time today. I'm honored.
Well, thank you very much, Julian, and I'm so delighted to meet you. And I see in you a person who's very devoted to passing a message in a very natural, human, and charming way. And good luck to you and your program.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate that. Inspired Tribe, I encourage you to go to julianrose.info, learn more. You can order his books, of course, and learn more about the current work, the past work, and the future work. Thank you so much for tuning in. We love you. We appreciate you, and we'll be back with you again very, very soon.